Pollution should not be free anywhere in Canada.
Tonight, 3 national Indigenous leaders joined the First Ministers meeting where getting oil to the market is a top priority.
We would argue that one could apply the criminal code provision around aggravated assault.
Human rights groups are calling out Canada for allowing sterilization without consent. And it's that time of year when you'll see something that looks a little out of the ordinary in the Arctic. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Leaders from 3 national Indigenous groups met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and provincial and territorial premiers today at the First Ministers meeting in Montreal. Each had 10 minutes to make a case for how to improve the economy for Indigenous people in Canada while considering environmental impacts. Tom Fenario has this story.
Prime Minister Trudeau opened the First Ministers meeting by addressing the Indigenous leaders in attendance.
Today, I'm excited to hear from all of you on something that should matter to all Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. I'm talking about the economic success and empowerment of Indigenous peoples.
This meeting was convened for provinces, the federal government, and Indigenous leaders to discuss Canada's economy, which for premiers like Alberta's Rachel Notley means helping the fossil fuel market.
We will be raising the fact that we think the single most important issue facing Canada's economy right now is the difficulty that we are having with respect to getting our oil and gas products to market.
Aside from pushing for the building of oil and gas pipelines, several premiers are rejecting the notion of a carbon tax. Naden Obed, president of Inuit Tapira Kanatami, says he told Trudeau and the premiers that building up infrastructure on Inuit territory is essential, but so is protecting the environment and, by extension, the Inuit way of life.
When I said in the room that last winter our averages were 5 degrees centigrade over historical averages for the winter of 2017, there were actual gasps. And I hope that there are considerations then from that.
But preventing climate change is not necessarily a priority for other Indigenous leaders. Clément Chartier, president of the Métis National Council, continues to throw his support behind the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
I believe that, in terms of the Métis Nation, we rely on economic opportunities, and we always have, because, we're basically abandoned, if I can use that term, or orphaned from the federal government for, the last 100 years.
Assembly of First Nations National Chief Perry Bellegarde emphasized to premiers the importance of investing in jobs training for First Nations to offset Canada's skilled labour shortage. As for oil and gas development, he stresses that all First Nations involved be consulted from start to finish.
So it's start, it's the beginning. Hopefully that you'll find that space between the economy and the environment, and that's what it's all about.
After the meeting, the premiers and Trudeau appeared far away on how to achieve harmony between the economy and environment. Several premiers accused the Prime Minister of moving the goalposts with regards to his carbon tax plan.
Pollution should not be free anywhere in Canada. After all, future generations, our kids and grandkids, are counting on us as leaders to act.
But with no firm commitment on paper, for the time being the high-wire act of economy and environment remains hanging in the balance. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
Alberta Premier Rachel Notley says the First Ministers had a fulsome discussion about how the effect of low oil prices are having on Alberta's oil industry and workers and on the Canadian economy. She's pleased it made it onto the agenda at the meeting in Montreal. Notley says she made requests for short-term support and for workers and the industry, medium-term support to boost rail capacity to move oil, and longer-term support to build infrastructure. When asked if she's leaving the meeting with anything tangible, this is what Notley had to say.
Not as of yet. Nope. What we did was we definitely raised the profile of the issue. We made it very clear what we are looking for. I think there's willingness to look at it, but we don't have the answer yet. I've got to be frank on that.
So what's the next step then?
Well, we're just going to keep pushing. As I said, when it comes to the medium-term solution, we can't afford to dither. As I said before, admiring the problem is a tactic of the past, and it is not one.
We want to hear what you think. Here's how you can continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptnnews. You can also follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more Indigenous news. The United Nations Committee Against Torture released a report today calling the sterilizing of Indigenous women in Canada without consent a form of torture. At an Ottawa press conference, stakeholders asked Canada to hold those responsible to account and suggested laws be adopted to criminalize sterilization without consent.
We would argue that one could apply the criminal code provision around aggravated assault. Why it isn't, I think, speaks to systemic bias and racism in the provision of public services to Indigenous peoples in this country, which is well known, well established, and certainly that's why we're looking at things like the TRC calls to action to look for guidance on how to address the systemic racism in the provision of public services.
Secondly, the federal government needs to convene professional bodies who are responsible for regulation in this area to ensure there's consistent policy and effective accountability mechanisms across jurisdictions. Because what we're seeing now is discrepancies in policy among regulatory bodies, which is allowing a lack of accountability for this practice.
Indigenous people are entering the business world at ever-increasing rates, but does Indigenous economic growth to the tune of $100 billion 5 years from now sound far-fetched? Carol Ann Hilton doesn't think so. She's the CEO and founder of the Indigenomics Institute, and she joins me from our Ottawa studio. So what is Indigenomics?
Indigenomics is economics from an Indigenous worldview. It speaks to the resilience that we're still here as Indigenous peoples within this country, that we're economic powerhouses, and that really where we're at as a country requires economics as a concept of modern Indigenous economic design.
And how do you come up with a value of $100 billion in 5 years?
The value of $100 billion in 5 years is looking at the existing measurements for the size of the National Indigenous Economic Agenda, and realizing that the 2016 value is at $32 billion, growing from 24, I believe, in 22. Those early measurements are suggesting a rapid escalated growth of the economy. So $100 billion is really the potential of, is that possible within 5 years, and with focused targeted growth as a concept of Indigenomics as modern Indigenous economic design.
And what's your background? I'm assuming you have a background in economics.
My background, I did an international MBA. I've worked in business now for well over 20 years.
And you see...
I also... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, and you see that there's a lot of untapped growth within the Indigenous community in this country?
Absolutely. The current legal environment has created the conditions for Aboriginal economic growth. Those conditions have been won through legal cases that sets new behaviors, new actions, and new kind of policy shifts, new investment environment to be able to support the growth of the Indigenous economy.
Is there government support for this initiative?
I believe that the concept of Indigenomics is the ability to put out this call or an invitation of who wants to play Indigenomics. When the federal government is able to identify the potential of the $100 billion Indigenous economy, it's an invitation to sit at the economic table of which the leadership has occurred from within the Indigenous communities, within the nations, and that's really the ability for the federal government to create a response to say, we want to play Indigenomics, we believe $100 billion is possible, and this is the ability to participate in that. An example of that is the Aboriginal procurement environment and the ability to shift and focus on away from funding models into an investment model of the Indigenous economy.
And how will your Indigenomics Institute help see that this happens?
The Indigenomics Institute is focusing on creating a shift in the media narrative of this country to insert into Canadian consciousness away from this concept of Indigenous peoples are a burden on the fiscal system of this country towards Indigenous peoples are economic powerhouses. So building the story of growing Indigenous influence, the story of growing Indigenous business success, and the requirements for economic inclusion of today. That's one of the activities that the Institute is focusing on, as well as driving a national Indigenous economic research agenda that moves away from deficit thinking, that focuses on kind of the gaps, challenges, and barriers, to move that conversation forward and to be able to focus on constructive, generative research that moves towards the 100 billion, and looking at a economic design framework of how specifically to get to the $100 billion economy in 5 years. So utilizing economic leverage as specific kind of pathways, examples of like clean energy as an emerging market, equity ownership, the capitalization of the Indigenous economy, infrastructure, trade, all of those as examples of pathways to support the development of a $100 billion Indigenous economy.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch and see how this shakes down in the next 5 years. Thanks for joining me, Carol Ann.
Thank you.
A Saskatchewan First Nation is fighting for road access. I'll tell you about that when we come back from this break. But first, here's tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting off on the East Coast, we've got 0 and rain in St. John's, -6 and snow in Halifax. Inukjuak is -11 and snow. Clear and sunny in -20 in Coujawak. Chibougamau is -18, as is Saguenay. Sunny skies there, -11 in Montreal. 0s for Sarnia, Windsor, and Toronto, and sunshine in those communities. Big Trout Lake is some snow and -9. Thunder Bay is clear, -5. -13 in snow in Churchill, -9 in Norway House and God's Lake. Lots of sun down south, -9 in Dauphin, -7 in Brandon, -11 in Gimli and Winnipeg. Lots of sun in southern Saskatchewan, -10 in Yorkton, -8 for Estevan and Regina. -3 and sunny in Buffalo Narrows, -10 in snow in Stony Rapids, -7 in sunshine in Meadow Lake. Welcome back. What do cooking and social work have in common? Well, not much at first glance, but a Winnipeg entrepreneur thinks that she may have had the right recipe to gel these two. Brittany Hobson shakes this story out for us.
That's finished.
Things are brewing for Melissa Brown. The 32-year-old is embarking on a new career, one she says was years in the making.
My heart was saying, follow your dream of cooking and opening a restaurant. But then my mind was like, I just spent 7 years in school to help my community in a social service, environment. But then I was thinking, I was like, you know what, I could do that on my own with my restaurant.
2 months ago, Brown started Brownie's Urban Bistro, a catering service which blends dishes from both sides of her family. Brown is Anishinaabe and Jamaican. Her menu consists of traditional Indigenous foods such as rice, meat, and stews, and on the Caribbean side, jerk chicken and fried plantain.
Indigenous people were actually one of the healthiest groups of people in the world at one point in time. They were mind, body, and soul, and with colonialism and with the marginalization and discrimination, that brought upon a huge disconnect.
She works out of this kitchen in Winnipeg's West End, but is hoping to open her own storefront in the same area next year.
This place holds a lot of meaning to me, and it's in my neighborhood, the West End, right? So, and that's a big thing for me. I'm trying to, you know, keep it true to my roots, you know, in all aspects.
She's cooking up some big plans for the restaurant. It will also be home to an urban youth program where kids can gain experience and skills. For Brown, cooking acted as an outlet when things got rough, and she hopes to offer that healing experience to others.
It was always in the kitchen with my music that I was able to bring myself back to feel normal again.
Brown says she is still figuring out details like funding and spacing, but some advice she got last month is pushing her to move forward.
He said the youth is the way. The youth are the way to do this, you know. So just hearing that, and with my ideas that I already had, I was just like, this is it. This is absolute. It was a confirmation, you know. Like to me, that said, like the Creator was giving me signs.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
That looks delicious. The map of Saskatchewan is dotted with dozens of remote towns, villages, and First Nations communities. Getting to some of them can be a time-consuming and hazardous journey. One of those communities is Hatchet Lake First Nation. There is no road, and the fight to build one has been going on for decades. CTV's Chris Najikude has the story.
For more than 30 years, Northern leaders have been pushing to have an all-weather road built for Wollaston Lake and Hatchet Lake First Nation. Prince Albert Grand Council says if built, it would be a lifeline to the more than 1,500 people living there.
We are forgotten living in the north with all the challenges that we have.
Northern leaders renewed their calls on the road with Premier Scott Moe and various ministers at the Legislative Building.
It was an opportunity for the chiefs to engage with the provincial government, the Premier.
Leaders say people are risking their lives just to travel to and from the community. In 2010, a teacher from Ontario died as a result of crashing into a large ice crack, submerging in more than a meter of water. And in 2016, a service truck plowing the ice road broke through the ice.
I never thought it would happen to me. I never thought it would go through the ice.
Just recently, this fall time, we lost an elder drowning just trying to cross that road, cross the lake into the community.
According to Associated Engineering in Prince Albert, the PAGC estimates the shovel-ready 102-kilometer road will cost $66.9 million, and they say the price tag can be divided in phases.
We contribute so much to this province. A community of Wollaston pays close to $2 million in terms of energy cost to Sask Power.
The provincial government says it was in talks with the federal government this past spring. However, the discussions were not finalized and federal ministers changed portfolios.
We've got proposals in front of Canada and we're just waiting to hear back as to what their response is going to be and what their commitment will be in helping us advance.
The NDP says they support the community's needs.
People, once and for all, want the road built. It is about economics, it's about safety, and it's about making sure people have access to affordability.
Vice Chief Tassani will keep pushing for the all-weather road, and the province says they're on board. Now it's just up to the federal government to come to the table, a decision that the province says will take some time. Chris Najikude, CTV News, Regina.
I need to take another quick break, but when we come back, holiday lights north of the tree line. Here's the rest of tomorrow's weather. Starting off in northern Alberta, -7s for high level in Fort Chip, -9 in Peace River, sunshine up there, -2 in Edmonton, -2 in Medicine Hat, +2 in Lethbridge. 4s for Vancouver and Campbell River, lots of cloud there, 6 and rain in Victoria. -11 and clear in Dease Lake, -12 in Fort Nelson, sunshine. -7 for Dawson City, -10 and sunny in Beaver Creek. -1 and sunshine in Norman Wells, -12 and snow in Wrigley, -5 in Yellowknife. Tuck is in at -13, as is in Nuvik, snow there, -5 for Paulatuck. Baker Lake is -28 and clear, Arviat clear and -17. minus 25 in snow in Arctic Bay. Igloolik is in at minus 27 with snow, and minus 21 in Clear in Iqaluit. Welcome back. Nunavut's capital city kicked off the holiday season with lights and a party last night. But how do you have a tree lighting north of the tree line? Here's Kent Driscoll in Iqaluit to explain.
The lines were long. The weather was, let's say, seasonal, and the crowd was joyous as Nunavut's Legislative Assembly prepared to turn on the Christmas lights. It's a national event called Christmas Lights Across Canada. Provincial and territorial capitals across the country were doing the same. But here, it's different. Iqaluit is the only Canadian capital above the tree line. How do you light the tree when we have no trees? Watch and see.
Wow! Beautiful. Thank you, girls.
Okay, so imported trees aren't exactly representative of Inuit. The entertainment was Maria Torchiak played for the crowd. Christmas is for the kids, and the crowd was mostly children, including this happy 4-year-old.
Kinavi, what's your name?
Bernadette.
Hi, Bernadette. Have you been a good girl this year? Is Santa coming to see you?
Yeah.
Yeah? What do you want from Santa, Bernadette?
I don't know.
There are 100,000 lights in this display. Just hours before they turned them on, the government of Nunavut announced a 1.5 cent per kilowatt hour hike in Nunavut's electricity rate, retroactively applied to November 1st. Merry Christmas! But that's a different story for a different day. The crowd for the light display wasn't complaining. There's plenty of time in the new year to do that. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
I don't think you could get any cuter than Bernadette. When Kevin Hart was announced as the host of the Oscars a few days ago, he said it was a dream role for him. Well, now it's just a dream. The comedian is stepping down from the gig after an outcry over anti-gay statements Hart made in the past. Hart confirmed he was stepping aside on Twitter this morning, saying he didn't want to be a distraction. The Academy had called him about complaints from a gay media watchdog group. Initially, Hart pushed back, posting on Instagram last night that people change, but he later apologized, saying he's sorry for hurting people. That's all the news we have for you this Friday. You can always catch up on what you've missed on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Melissa Ridgen, and I'll see you back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.